The morning my life quietly slipped away did not announce itself with shouting or chaos. It came dressed as concern, ordinary routines, and well-meant words. Betrayal is rarely loud, it is gentle, unassuming, and often unrecognizable until it is too late. Dear listener, thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let me know in the comments what country you are listening from. I truly appreciate it. Enjoy the story. Before I recount the events, you deserve to know who is speaking to you, because the lens through which I saw this betrayal defines everything that follows. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I am 62 years old, an American woman from a small town in Massachusetts, where the streets are narrow, neighbors know each other's birthdays, and life moves slowly enough to notice details most overlook. I spent 35 years teaching high school literature. I taught Shakespeare, Steinbeck, Morrison, stories about ambition, deception, courage, and human weakness. Every day, I reminded my students that words and choices matter, that people reveal their true character long before they confess it. I am a widow. My husband, Robert Whitmore, passed away 12 years ago from a sudden heart attack while tending our lawn. One moment, he was waving to me through the kitchen window, and the next, he was gone. That day left an emptiness in our home, but I stayed strong, raising my son alone. His name is Daniel Whitmore, 34 now, tall, intelligent, confident, but the boy I raised with love and patience is not the same man who stood in my kitchen that morning. I had prepared him for life, taught him responsibility and morality, but I underestimated one thing, the allure of control. That morning, Daniel was scrolling on his phone while I made breakfast, burnt toast, black coffee, rain tapping against the window. The ordinary rhythm of life, masking the storm about to arrive. "Mom," he said without looking up, "we need to talk." That phrase, innocent, everyday, and so deceptively calm, sent a shiver down my spine. Those 4 words often precede disaster. I sat down slowly. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, hiding the tension curling in my chest. "This isn't easy for me either," he said. I noticed how carefully he avoided my eyes, how the weight of rehearsed words hung heavy in the air. "The doctor agrees," he continued. "You shouldn't be living alone anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "Which doctor?" "Dr. Simmons," he replied. A young, efficient doctor, one who had long ago learned to side with my son rather than me. "I forget small things sometimes," I said evenly. "That does not mean I am incapable of living independently." Daniel stood and began pacing, rubbing his palms together. I recognized the movement. It was the same nervous pacing Robert had when weighing a heavy decision. "You left the stove on last month," Daniel accused, his voice tight. "Once. You misplaced your keys. They were in my coat. You slipped in the bathroom." "I slipped," I said firmly. "I did not fall." Each accusation sounded prepared, like evidence he had compiled quietly over months. "I've found a place," he said finally. "A good nursing home. Clean, safe, full professional care." The word nursing home hit me like ice. "I raised you in this house," I said softly. "I buried your father here. I have lived my life within these walls." His jaw tightened. "And I'm grateful," he said, almost defensively. "But this is for your own good." Those words, "for your own good," have destroyed more lives than cruelty ever could. 2 weeks later, my suitcase was packed. Not by me, of course. Daniel folded my clothes while I watched, feeling like a visitor in the home of my own life. He decided what I needed, what I didn't, what mattered. He drove. I stared out the window as familiar streets disappeared, the church where I volunteered, the library where I spent hours reading, the park where Daniel learned to ride a bike. My world was shrinking mile by mile. The building loomed behind iron gates, gray, tall, and sterile, decorated with potted flowers as if to mask the coldness inside. Whitmore Care Residence. Care, a word soft as feathers, yet hiding something sharp. Inside, nurses greeted me with rehearsed smiles, their eyes scanning charts, not me. Clipboards, schedules, and quiet glances replaced warmth. Daniel signed papers I was not allowed to read. My phone was taken, for safekeeping, and my house keys placed in an envelope with my name on it. My independence was politely removed. My room was small, bed and chair pressed close to walls. A window opened barely a few inches. The walls were thin, thin enough to catch whispers, thin enough to hear secrets. Daniel hugged me quickly, pulling away as if embracing me was a chore. "I'll visit every week," he promised. He didn't. The first night, I lay awake, listening to the strange sounds of the building, coughs, footsteps, wheels of carts, distant sobs. At exactly 10 o'clock, a heavy click echoed down the hallway. Doors locking. By the third night, I noticed something else, voices. Conversations drifting through walls, through vents, casual, careless, confident. And one voice sounded exactly like my son. I realized, then, that Daniel had not brought me here to protect me. He had brought me here because he believed I would comply. Because he believed I would accept the lie of helplessness. I am not helpless, and I am not blind. That realization marked the first night I understood what true vigilance means. Not just listening to walls or doors, but listening to people, to intentions, to the quiet signals that betray a secret. I began to record in my mind every detail, the way Daniel spoke to the staff, the pauses in his voice, the words he avoided. I memorized the patterns, the rhythms, the lies dressed as care. I started seeing the cracks in the facade, the smiles, the reassurances, the supposedly protective gestures. In the days that followed, I noticed little things, notes left by nurses, supplies removed from rooms, unusual schedules, strange names on the charts. My intuition, honed from years of observing human behavior, told me that Daniel was planning more than just my relocation. I understood that the building, the staff, the walls, they were all actors in his plan. And I, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, was not to be played. That night, I made a decision. I would pretend. I would seem compliant. I would show weakness. But I would not forget. I would not yield. And I would listen. The walls whispered secrets. And I, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, intended to hear every one of them. The first morning in the Whitmore Care residence arrived with a muted light. Rain had stopped, leaving the world damp, gray, and quiet, a reflection of the life I had been forced into. I awoke in a narrow bed, the sheets stiff with the scent of antiseptic. The room was unfamiliar, bland, and claustrophobic, though it tried to disguise itself as comforting. I sat up slowly, letting my legs dangle over the edge of the bed. A thin curtain hung over the window, allowing just enough light to see the hallway beyond. Through it, I noticed other residents beginning their routines, walkers clicking, slippers shuffling, faint murmurs of conversation that seemed rehearsed, like a chorus performing lines from a script they barely remembered. I realized immediately that this place was not designed to feel like home. It was designed to feel manageable, safe, and controlled, for the staff, for Daniel, for anyone who might question my presence. Safety was just a word here, control was the reality. The first nurse arrived precisely at 7, her hair tightly tied back, a clipboard in hand, eyes scanning more for schedules than for human needs. She smiled, polite but not warm. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore. Breakfast will be served in 30 minutes. We'll be here if you need anything," she said, turning on her heel almost immediately, as if her presence had been a formality rather than care. I dressed slowly, paying attention to the textures of the clothes Daniel had chosen for me. Neutral colors, soft fabrics. Functional, not comforting. I realized he thought clothing could somehow soften the impact of this relocation, that neutral colors would make me blend in, compliant and invisible. At breakfast, the dining room was an echo chamber of forced politeness. Residents sat in neat rows, trays arranged with precision. Conversations were superficial, laughter canned. I scanned faces, noting expressions that fluctuated between despair, confusion, and practiced contentment. It was during that breakfast that I began to notice the first peculiarities, the smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the hesitant glances from staff when a resident asked a question, the almost imperceptible whispering between aides. These were not ordinary interactions, they were rehearsed, choreographed, the movements of people who understood that something, or someone, was being hidden. And that someone was me. By late morning, I had familiarized myself with the hallway. Every room had a small nameplate, every door a lock. The staff carried keys and keycards clipped to belts, and each lock clicked with deliberate finality. I realized that this was not only a matter of care but also of control. My movement was monitored, my choices limited, my independence systematically erased. In the afternoon, Daniel called from his office. His voice was practiced, calm, almost affectionate. "How's breakfast?" he asked. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice light. I did not tell him I had observed the whispering, the hidden gestures, the calculated smiles. He didn't need to know that I already saw through his plan. "Great. Make sure you eat, Mom," he said. "I'll come by next week." He lied. I knew he would not come. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, eyes tracing the ceiling tiles. Every detail mattered. Every nuance, every gesture, every tiny action was a clue. I would memorize them all. Daniel had underestimated me. He did not realize that years of teaching literature had trained me to notice character, to read between the lines, to uncover motives. The afternoon passed in a blur of activities designed to keep residents occupied yet docile. Chair exercises, group puzzles, polite conversations, and scheduled medications. I participated when necessary, noting every detail, the timing, the slips, the small secrets carried in brief glances, the way one aide lingered at a particular door longer than she should have. When evening came, the building fell into a different rhythm. The lights dimmed, the hallways grew quiet, and the subtle but unmistakable click of locks sealed each corridor. That click, repeated nightly, reminded me that my son believed I would comply, that I would stay passive, that I would accept his control. I waited until the staff assumed all residents were asleep. Then I began listening. I heard whispers, names, schedules, instructions, and hints that confirmed my suspicions. Daniel was not only orchestrating my relocation but also concealing something more, something he did not want me to know. That night, as I lay awake, I pieced together patterns. The same aides always visited certain rooms at precise times. The same residents received extra attention, or none at all. The doors clicked with identical timing. And Daniel's presence was felt even when absent. His control extended through staff who had been trained to obey instructions silently. I began keeping mental notes, detailed observations that I would later use. Every shift change, every small conversation, every fleeting look, all of it mattered. I understood now that survival was not only about endurance but about awareness. Over the next few days, I tested boundaries quietly. I asked questions, pretending ignorance. I requested small things, noting who hesitated or corrected the staff. I watched reactions, measured responses, and built a map of the home's hidden rhythms. I realized I was not alone in noticing. Other residents shared fleeting glances of understanding, silent acknowledgments that whispered, "We are aware." But most were too resigned, too fearful, or too compliant to act. I could not blame them. I had lived here barely 3 days, and yet I already felt the weight of the building's subtle oppression. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation that confirmed what I had feared. Two aides spoke in low tones, unaware that I was within earshot. "Mr. Whitmore is very particular," one said. "He wants everything by the book. No deviations." "Yes," the other replied. "Even Mrs. Whitmore. He insists she stays in line, follows the schedule." I froze. The truth was worse than I had imagined. My son was orchestrating my life not for safety, not for care, but for control. Every step, every meal, every movement was calculated to reinforce his authority. That night, I lay awake thinking about Daniel's words, "for your own good." I realized that, good, was his version, a carefully curated illusion designed to manipulate, to dominate, and perhaps to hide motives I could not yet comprehend. I also realized that pretending compliance would be my greatest weapon. I would appear passive, weak, and obedient while I listened, memorized, and planned. My son did not understand that I had spent decades observing human behavior, reading character, and recognizing deceit. And so, as the night deepened, I closed my eyes, but my mind remained alert. Every sound, every whisper, every click of a lock was absorbed. Every detail mattered, for the truth would not remain hidden forever. By the end of the first week, I had mapped the routines, memorized the staff schedules, and noted the residents most likely to cooperate or resist. The walls themselves had begun to reveal their secrets. The building, I realized, was less of a home and more of a stage. And I, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, would play the longest, most dangerous role, the observer. For the first time, I felt a surge of clarity. The nursing home was not my prison, it was my classroom. Every day, every action, every gesture was a lesson. And unlike my son, I was learning faster than he expected. I understood, fully, that I could never truly trust him again. I also understood that appearing vulnerable was my shield. Behind the facade of an obedient, compliant resident lay a mind alert, patient, and calculating. The locked smiles of the staff, the rehearsed pleasantries of my fellow residents, the monotony of schedules, all were pieces of a puzzle I was assembling. Daniel thought he was controlling me. But in truth, I was already taking control of the one thing he could never have, the knowledge, the observation, and the patience to outlast him. And so, I waited. I listened. I learned. Every whisper, every step, every glance would bring me closer to understanding the full story, a story Daniel had thought I would never hear. And I would hear it. Every single secret. The third night at Whitmore Care Residence, the question formed clearly in my mind, why do the doors lock at night? At first, I assumed it was safety, a standard precaution to protect residents from wandering in the dark. But as I lay awake listening to the muted hum of the heating system and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, I began to suspect there was more to it. I had learned quickly that routine in this building was both rigid and revealing. Staff arrived and left at precise intervals, meals were served on strict schedules, and lights flickered on and off exactly when they were supposed to. Everything was controlled, everything monitored, and I, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, had only just begun to notice the patterns. The first click echoed at precisely 10 o'clock, a heavy, deliberate sound that carried through the thin walls. That click was followed by a faint, almost inaudible sigh from the hallway, then silence. I had heard it the previous nights, but tonight, for the first time, I listened not with fear, but with deliberate attention. I sat up in bed, swinging my legs over the side. My body ached slightly from sleeping on the stiff mattress, but my mind was alert. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to catch the subtle sounds of the corridors. Footsteps, muted conversations, the distant whir of a cleaning cart, and then, whispers. Voices I had not expected. Voices of staff discussing schedules, supplies, and occasionally, the residents themselves. And then, unmistakably, Daniel's voice, though I could not place it in space. Was he on the phone? Or had he come here himself? I did not know. I only knew that my son, the boy I had raised, was involved in something I was not supposed to understand. I reflected on the irony. The very walls designed to contain me were revealing everything if I listened carefully enough. The locks, intended to ensure my compliance, were markers, signaling the boundaries of control, and yet also allowing me to map the patterns of those who wielded it. The nights blurred together as I began to document every detail in my mind. Every click, every step, every whisper became a point of reference. By the fourth night, I could tell which aide was responsible for which corridor, which residents required extra attention, and which ones were most likely to be manipulated by Daniel's instructions. One night, I overheard two aides speaking in low tones near the nurse's station. "Do you think she notices?" asked the younger one, glancing toward my room. "She's old, yes," replied the older aide, "but sharp. Don't underestimate her. Mr. Whitmore has very specific instructions." The words hit me harder than I expected. Daniel had orchestrated this entire routine. Every shift, every door, every schedule was part of his plan to keep me under his watch. He believed I would comply, that I would fade quietly into the background. He had underestimated the patient observation skills of a woman who had spent decades teaching and reading human behavior. That night, I lay back in bed, closing my eyes, but my mind refused rest. I thought of every decision Daniel had made, every choice that led me here. And I realized that the locks were not just physical barriers, they were symbols. They represented the control my son had assumed over my life. And if he thought control would be simple, he was gravely mistaken. I began to test the limits of the system. I would pretend to sleep, then quietly shift in bed to see if any staff were monitoring the corridors. Occasionally, I would ask subtle questions during meals or therapy sessions, observing reactions. Every twitch of an eyebrow, every pause in speech, every unnecessary gesture became data. One evening, a fellow resident, a frail woman named Mrs. Langley, whispered to me as the lights dimmed, "Don't trust the schedules. Don't trust the rules." Her voice was a thread of truth in the otherwise controlled environment. She had been here longer than me and understood the subtle manipulations at work. I nodded, acknowledging her wisdom silently, while keeping my own voice composed. She had seen what I was only beginning to understand, that the nursing home was not merely a place of care but a stage for control and secrecy. By the fifth night, my awareness of the environment had sharpened considerably. I knew when staff would come to check vital signs, when meals were delivered, and when the hallways would be silent enough for whispered conversations. I began to catalog not just the routines but also the vulnerabilities. Every locked door was a clue, every suppressed sound a signal. The walls themselves began to tell me stories. Voices, laughter, sighs, footsteps, and doors moving. Each sound was a piece of the puzzle. And slowly, I started to assemble the picture of Daniel's hidden agenda. He had placed me here under the guise of protection, yet everything suggested there was more, something he believed I would never notice. That night, I listened longer than usual, allowing my ears to capture the nuances of human behavior, hesitation in speech, quick corrections, subtle changes in tone. I realized that understanding human behavior was like reading literature. Patterns emerged if you paid attention, if you connected the dots, if you noticed what others assumed was invisible. I began to imagine a timeline, mapping staff shifts, doors, and resident routines. Every click of a lock was now part of my data. Every whispered instruction became a thread connecting Daniel to the orchestrators of my daily life. I was creating a mental map that would allow me to anticipate actions, detect secrets, and eventually confront the truth. The more I listened, the more I realized how naive I had been. Daniel had underestimated the one skill I had honed for decades, observation. He thought he was moving me into safety, but in reality, he had placed himself in a position where his actions were entirely visible to me. By the end of that week, I felt a strange empowerment. I was no longer the passive participant in this environment. I was the observer, the strategist, the silent witness. I understood the meaning behind the locks, the whispered words, and the rehearsed smiles. And with that understanding came patience, a patience that Daniel did not anticipate. As I lay awake, listening to the quiet rhythm of the residents, I made a vow: I would endure, I would observe, and I would uncover every hidden secret. The doors may lock at night, the staff may smile, and Daniel may believe he controls my life, but I was learning, and knowledge would become my greatest weapon. And so, the question that began the third night became my guiding principle: why do the doors lock at night? The answer would reveal itself soon enough. And when it did, Daniel would realize, too late, that I had been listening all along. The nights in Whitmore Care residence had settled into a rhythm. I had learned the timing of the clicks, the footsteps, and the whispered instructions. But that fourth night, as I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the dim glow of the hallway light through my half-open window, I realized something had changed. The building, once predictable, now seemed alive, as though it were breathing around me. And it was about to speak its first secret, a secret Daniel had assumed I would never hear. I had spent days observing every movement, memorizing routines, and cataloging the staff, but that night the world beyond my door began to reveal something different. There was a low murmur, voices exchanging words too soft for most residents to catch. I pressed my ear against the wall and listened. Every word, every pause, every subtle shift in tone became data. And then it came, the unmistakable cadence of Daniel's voice. Not over the phone, not from a distance, but here, inside the building. I could not see him, could not touch him, yet I knew it was him. There was an urgency in his tone that betrayed anxiety, a sharpness I had never heard before, a sound that revealed a side of him I had not imagined. "I told you she wouldn't understand," Daniel said. His words were crisp, controlled, but tense. "We have to be careful. No one can know yet." Another voice, softer and familiar, responded. It was an aide, one I had come to recognize by their footsteps and the subtle lilt of their speech. "Don't worry, Mr. Whitmore. Everything is under control. She doesn't suspect a thing." The words pierced me like a blade. She doesn't suspect a thing. Daniel assumed I was blind, passive, and unaware. He had no idea that Eleanor Grace Whitmore, teacher, widow, mother, observer, was listening. I lay perfectly still, pretending to sleep. My heart pounded in my chest, but outwardly I was calm, silent, unassuming. The room was dark, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and faint perfume from the aids. Every small sound carried weight. I absorbed each phrase, each inflection, each pause. I had to know more. This secret, whatever it was the key to understanding Daniel's true intentions. And so, I waited. Hours passed. The night deepened. Footsteps came and went, whispers drifted along the hall, and the clicking of locks punctuated the darkness. I listened to every syllable, memorized every tone, and traced the patterns that would reveal the story hidden from me. "You think she'll stay compliant?" Daniel asked. The tension in his voice was palpable now. "She's stronger than we anticipated. We can't afford mistakes." "You underestimate her," the aide replied. "She notices everything. She watches, she listens. But she's patient, for now." I smirked quietly to myself. They had no idea. My patience was not weakness. My observation was not idle. I had lived through betrayal, loss, and the quiet manipulations of human behavior. I was not about to be fooled now. The conversation continued, their words weaving a web of secrecy that I slowly unraveled in my mind. Daniel had orchestrated my move to the nursing home not simply to care for me, but to control me. Every staff member, every schedule, every routine was part of a plan. And within that plan lay a secret I was not supposed to know. I remembered the first night, the first click of the locks, the first whispered conversation I had overheard. Everything aligned now, the routines, the staff movements, the rehearsed smiles, the locked doors. They were all pieces of a puzzle I was beginning to assemble. By the fifth night, I had begun to predict the conversations before they happened. I could hear Daniel's voice in my mind, anticipate his words, and trace the motives behind each phrase. The secret was larger than mere control. It was a carefully constructed deception, designed to isolate me, manipulate me, and conceal intentions that I was only beginning to understand. I lay awake, letting my mind replay the conversation. Every phrase, every subtle inflection, every pause was a thread I followed to unravel the truth. And slowly, a picture emerged, a pattern of manipulation, a plan of secrecy, and a network of obedience that Daniel had constructed to keep me unaware. But I was aware, I was listening, I was observing, and with each passing night, I collected more pieces of the puzzle. I began to understand the depth of his planning, the lengths he had gone to, and the subtle cues he had left that betrayed his true intentions. That night, I realized something important. This secret, the first one I had overheard, was not merely about me. It was about power, control, a desire to dictate not just my actions, but my thoughts, my perceptions, my reality. Daniel believed he could confine me, manipulate me, and dictate the narrative of my life. He believed he could hide his motives behind a facade of concern, care, and obligation. But I was not blind. I was not passive. I was Eleanor Grace Whitmore, and I had spent decades reading between the lines, observing character, and detecting deceit. I had survived betrayal, widowhood, and the isolation of grief. And now, I would survive this. I would endure, I would observe, and I would uncover every hidden truth. The night wore on, and the voices finally faded. The building fell silent once more, the locks clicked into place, and the faint hum of the heating system became the only sound. I lay in bed, my mind racing, cataloging every detail, memorizing every word, and tracing the patterns that would reveal the truth. By the end of the night, I understood that this first secret was only the beginning. There would be more whispers, more hidden conversations, more threads to follow. And I would follow them all, patiently, meticulously, and with unwavering focus. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness envelop me, but my mind remained alert. Every sound, every click, every whisper was a lesson, a clue, and a piece of the story Daniel believed I would never hear. And I would hear it. Every single secret. By the 5th week at Whitmore Care Residence, I had become attuned to every rhythm of the building, the rise and fall of footsteps, the quiet whispers behind closed doors, and the subtle variations in the locked corridors. Yet, nothing had prepared me for her. The nurse who knew too much. Her name was Margaret, Maggie, Holloway, a woman in her late 40s with eyes like storm clouds, gray, observant, and unyielding. She moved with purpose, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. I had first noticed her during my second day, glancing at me as if she recognized something that others did not. While other staff wore smiles that barely reached their eyes, Maggie's gaze pierced through the illusion, through the rehearsed calm, and into the very essence of the residents she served. It was during evening rounds when I first heard her speak to another aide in a low, urgent whisper. "Do you think she knows?" Maggie asked, her voice barely audible, yet sharp enough to make me sit up in bed and listen. "She, Mrs. Whitmore," the other aide replied. "No, she doesn't suspect anything, but Mr. Whitmore is meticulous. He's controlling everything." I felt a chill run down my spine. They were talking about Daniel, and they assumed I had no awareness. But I was listening, every word, every pause, every inflection. That night, I lay awake, analyzing their tones, their gestures, and the subtle hierarchy Maggie seemed to navigate. She was clearly in Daniel's confidence, yet something about her demeanor suggested hesitation, perhaps a secret rebellion, or simply awareness of the precarious balance she maintained. Over the next few days, I began observing Maggie closely. She handled residents with care, but with a meticulous precision that bordered on calculated. Every action she took was deliberate, measuring the dosage of medications, adjusting wheelchairs, checking charts twice. She never hurried, yet every movement conveyed urgency beneath calmness. One afternoon, as I sat quietly in the common room pretending to read a magazine, Maggie approached me. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, pulling a chair to sit beside me. Her voice was gentle, almost conspiratorial. "How are you adjusting?" I looked up at her, feigning vulnerability, and smiled faintly. "I'm managing," I said. Her eyes lingered on mine, and for a moment, I felt an unspoken acknowledgement, as if she sensed that I understood far more than I let on. She excused herself shortly after, but her presence lingered in my thoughts. Maggie was more than a nurse, she was a variable in Daniel's carefully constructed plan, a variable he could not fully control. That night, I began listening intently for Maggie's voice. And soon enough, I heard her speaking in the hallway to the other aides. "Be careful, she notices everything." "More than we expected," Maggie whispered. I smiled inwardly. She had no idea I was listening. She assumed Daniel had underestimated me, but in truth, she was acknowledging my awareness. The revelation of Maggie's knowledge altered my perspective. Daniel had built an empire of control here, but Maggie's awareness suggested cracks in that control. Perhaps she could be an ally, or perhaps she would reveal too much. Either way, she was a key piece in the unfolding puzzle. By the 6th night, I decided to test her. During rounds, I asked her subtle, seemingly innocuous questions about schedules and routines. Her responses were precise, careful, and measured, yet hints of discomfort flickered in her eyes. I sensed she was weighing her words, ensuring she revealed nothing that might compromise her position, yet giving me just enough to understand her awareness. Later, as I lay in bed listening, I replayed every interaction, every glance, every word Maggie had spoken. I realized she was navigating a delicate balance. One wrong move could jeopardize her job, and perhaps more. Daniel's control extended through her, but she was not blind to the truth. She knew the stakes, and she knew I was not an ordinary resident. One evening, I overheard a conversation between Maggie and another aide that confirmed my suspicions. "She's sharper than anyone realizes," Maggie said. "If we're not careful, she could expose everything." "Everything? Do you mean?" the aide began, but Maggie cut him off. "Shish, not here. Mr. Whitmore expects compliance. Don't make mistakes." I lay in bed, absorbing every detail. Daniel's plan was extensive, but it relied on silence and obedience. Maggie's awareness suggested that the foundation was unstable. She was a living variable, capable of tipping the balance, and I intended to observe her, learn from her, and perhaps, when the time was right, use her knowledge to my advantage. The following days were a careful dance. I maintained the facade of compliance while paying close attention to Maggie. I noted her interactions with other residents, her subtle hesitations, and the small, almost imperceptible signals she sent to those she trusted. Every gesture, every glance, every pause was a clue. By the end of the week, I had formulated a plan. I would continue to listen, to observe, and to understand the network of control Daniel had established. Maggie was a critical node in that network, and her awareness could either be a threat or an asset. I needed to watch her, to gauge her intentions, and to determine whether she could be trusted, or whether she would betray me, intentionally or otherwise. That night, as the doors clicked into place and the corridors fell silent, I lay awake listening to every sound. Footsteps, whispers, the subtle shuffle of shoes across linoleum. Every detail was a thread, weaving a tapestry of information that I was slowly assembling. Maggie's presence was the most intriguing thread of all. I realized that Daniel's belief in absolute control was an illusion. He had built his carefully orchestrated environment, but he had overlooked one thing, me. I was not passive, I was not blind, and now, I had another observer, Maggie, whose awareness added a new layer of complexity to the environment. I smiled quietly to myself. The game was becoming more intricate, more challenging, more revealing. And I was ready. As the night deepened, I closed my eyes, not in sleep, but in observation. Every whisper, every click, every step was a lesson. Every word Maggie spoke, every subtle gesture, every hidden glance was a piece of the story Daniel believed I would never uncover. I would uncover it, every piece, every secret, every hidden motive, and the nurse who knew too much would play a pivotal role in what was to come. By the 6th week, the nights in Whitmore Care residence had taken on a rhythm that was almost hypnotic, yet every sound carried hidden meaning. Footsteps echoed down the hallways, doors clicked into place with precision, and whispers floated through the corridors like faint specters. It was during one of these nights that I overheard something that changed everything, a whispered plan Daniel thought I would never hear. I had learned to lie awake silently, pretending sleep while listening intently. My ears became instruments of perception. Every shift, every sigh, every hushed conversation was noted, categorized, and stored in the mental ledger I kept of this building. Each night revealed a fragment, a clue, a secret. And that night, the pieces began to fit together in a way that exposed the true nature of Daniel's control. It was just past 10 o'clock when I first caught the voices. They were low, cautious, but unmistakable. One was Daniel, though his tone was sharper, tense, filled with an urgency I had not heard in previous conversations. The other was Maggie, the nurse whose awareness had both intrigued and unsettled me in equal measure. "We can't leave her unsupervised," Daniel said. His words were clipped, almost businesslike, but his anxiety seeped through. "She's noticing things. She's intelligent. Too intelligent for this to be simple." "You underestimate her," Maggie replied softly. "She's already noticed the patterns. She's cataloging everything." Daniel's breath hitched slightly. "I didn't expect her to be capable. She's supposed to comply. We built this for compliance." I felt a surge of vindication. He had assumed obedience, he had assumed passivity. He had miscalculated entirely. The conversation continued, voices low, careful, measured, yet full of tension. I pieced together their plan, deciphering meaning from fragments. Daniel had not simply placed me in the nursing home for safety or care, he had constructed an environment designed to isolate, control, and manipulate. Every staff member, every schedule, every locked door was part of a meticulously orchestrated scheme. "We have to tighten the schedules," Daniel said. "She's clever. If we leave gaps, she'll see through everything. Every routine, every check, every shift must be precise. No deviations." Maggie's sigh was quiet but audible. "I can do that, but you need to understand, she notices even the slightest inconsistencies. She's watching patterns. She's calculating." Daniel's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "Then we double-check everything. Every staff member, every corridor, every resident interaction. She must not see the full picture." I lay in bed, my mind racing. They believed they were clever, that their meticulous planning could prevent me from discovering the truth. They believed the locked doors, the routines, and the whispers kept me in ignorance. But they had underestimated one thing: I had spent a lifetime observing human behavior. I had spent decades reading intentions, detecting deceit, and noticing subtle cues. I began to formulate my own plan in response. If Daniel and Maggie thought they could manipulate me, then I would manipulate my own awareness to my advantage. I would catalog, memorize, and track everything. Every schedule, every interaction, every hidden gesture would become ammunition in the silent war unfolding around me. Over the following nights, I observed the execution of their whispered plan. Schedules tightened. Staff movements became more precise. The residents were corralled into routines that left little room for deviation. Doors clicked more frequently, hallways emptied at predictable intervals. It was all calculated, all deliberate. Yet even within this orchestrated precision, I noticed cracks. A brief hesitation. Here, a whispered comment there, a glance exchanged between staff that suggested uncertainty. Maggie, in particular, displayed subtle cues, slight pauses, a tightening of the jaw, an almost imperceptible shift in posture that indicated she was aware of my observation. She was a node of unpredictability within Daniel's otherwise controlled network. One night, I overheard a critical fragment of their plan that made my pulse quicken. "Tonight, we move the medications to the new storage room," Daniel whispered, urgency in his voice. "She cannot access them. We cannot allow her to piece things together before the final stage." Maggie responded, careful, controlled. "Understood. But she's intelligent. She will notice. You must anticipate her observations." I lay still, heart pounding. This was the first time I realized the full extent of their orchestration. It was not just about control, it was about concealment. Daniel had constructed layers of information, hiding his true motives behind routine, care, and structure. Every action, every whispered instruction was designed to prevent me from uncovering the ultimate truth. And yet, I was uncovering it. The following days, I observed the execution of their plan with heightened vigilance. I memorized the storage locations, tracked the movement of staff, and noted inconsistencies. Every door, every corridor, every whispered conversation became data points in a mental map of the nursing home's inner workings. By the seventh night, I had begun to anticipate the next steps of their plan. I predicted when staff would check vital signs, when medications would be moved, and when doors would be locked or unlocked. My awareness became a shield, a weapon, and a lens through which I could see the truth behind Daniel's meticulous orchestration. The whispered plan had revealed a dangerous truth: Daniel's intentions were not benevolent. He believed he was acting in my best interest, yet every action was designed to consolidate his control, to limit my agency, and to hide secrets I was not meant to uncover. That night, as I lay awake, cataloging every sound, every step, every whisper, I realized the profound significance of what I had discovered. The whispered plan was a window into Daniel's true intentions, a glimpse of the manipulation, deceit, and hidden motives that underpinned my confinement. I understood that survival required more than endurance. It required awareness, patience, and strategy. I would continue to observe, to catalog, and to anticipate. Every move Daniel made, every instruction he issued, every hidden thread of his plan would be noted, remembered, and used when the time came. And I would wait. Because knowledge was power, observation was defense, and patience, above all, was my greatest ally. The whispered plan in the night had revealed the stakes, the players, and the strategy. It had exposed the depths of control Daniel sought to exert. But it had also revealed a weakness, a dependence on secrecy, a reliance on compliance, and the human factor of unpredictability. And I, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, had become the observer who would not be deceived. I would uncover every secret, understand every motive, and survive the night, the residents, and the manipulations that Daniel believed would confine me. By the seventh week, my nights had evolved into something far more deliberate than simple vigilance. I was no longer merely listening, I was mapping. Every corridor, every locked door, every staff member's step and whisper was a thread in a complex web of control that Daniel had woven. And then, one night, I discovered something entirely unexpected, the existence of a hidden room within Whitmore Care residence. It began as a subtle anomaly. While cataloging routines, I noticed that one section of the East Wing, a wing mostly closed off after evening rounds, had a faint hum of activity at odd hours. Staff came and went, often alone, always with a sense of urgency, yet the residents nearby never seemed to notice. Curiosity, sharpened by years of observation, urged me to investigate. I bided my time, pretending sleep as usual. But that night, I adjusted my position, ensuring I could hear not just the sounds of the hallway outside my door, but the faint creaks from the section of the building that Daniel and his aides clearly treated with care. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock, followed by a soft click that resonated differently from the usual nightly locks. Something was behind that door. Something I was not meant to see. The conversation between two aides reached my ears as I pressed closer to the wall, straining. "Do you think she suspects anything?" one asked nervously. "She notices patterns, yes," replied the other. "But she's patient, for now. Just make sure nothing leaves the room." The words were simple, yet they carried gravity. Whatever was in that room, Daniel and his staff went to great lengths to protect it. And I had no intention of ignoring it. The following days became a careful game of observation. I noted every staff member who entered the East Wing, their schedules, the timing of key usage, and the subtle signals exchanged before and after entering the room. I could not see inside, but I could map the activity. Each visit was like a pulse, a heartbeat revealing the existence of something far more significant than routine care. One evening, Maggie, the nurse who had long fascinated and unsettled me, appeared unusually tense as she walked past my room. I caught her glance and interpreted the subtle cues, a tightened jaw, a brief hesitation, the almost imperceptible shift in her gait. She knew I was listening, but she could not ignore her responsibilities. That tension alone confirmed that the hidden room was more than just storage or administrative work, it was central to Daniel's secret operations. By the 8th week, I had memorized the pattern of access. Each night, there was a window of precisely 12 minutes when staff entered and exited without any apparent resident oversight. This window became my opportunity. I would not enter physically, I was not yet ready, but I could listen, observe, and gather intelligence. And so, I lay awake, straining to catch every whispered instruction, every step, every sound of objects being moved within the hidden room. "It has to remain sealed," Daniel's voice whispered, tense and commanding. "No one can know, especially not her." "You realize she listens," Maggie replied, her voice low but firm. "She notices patterns, behaviors, she's far more capable than you think." Daniel's sigh was almost audible. "I don't care. The plan must proceed. Lock it tight, leave no gaps." I felt my heart race. The room contained something critical, something Daniel considered so vital that even Maggie, who had long been aware of my observations, treated its secrecy with reverence. Over the next few nights, I listened to the contents of conversations I pieced together from echoes, muffled sounds, and indirect references. The hidden room contained documents, charts, and possibly recordings. Every time staff opened the door, they spoke in hushed tones, coordinated movements, and exchanged subtle gestures that indicated they were aware of the consequences of exposure. The more I observed, the more I understood the stakes. Daniel had created a controlled environment, complete with routines, schedules, and obedience. But this hidden room represented the heart of that control: information. Knowledge about residents, staff, and even me. It was a central hub where he collected, analyzed, and stored the pieces necessary to maintain his dominance. And that made me the silent witness, the one person who could see everything without being seen. I became acutely aware of my role. Each night, as I lay in bed pretending sleep, I pieced together information from sound cues, whispers, and patterns. The hidden room was more than just a storage space, it was a symbol of Daniel's obsession with control and secrecy. I began imagining scenarios. If I could access or influence the knowledge within that room, even indirectly, I could gain leverage. I could anticipate his moves, predict staff actions, and perhaps, eventually, confront the truth. Every step, every whisper, every lock became a key piece in my strategy. One night, I overheard a particularly revealing exchange. "We need to verify her schedule," Daniel said sharply. "She must not disrupt the final stage." Maggie replied, cautious, almost hesitant. "She's noticing inconsistencies. Even small deviations could alert her." Daniel's frustration was clear. "Then tighten everything. Lock the doors, monitor the corridors, double-check routines. Nothing leaves the room." I closed my eyes, absorbing every word. The hidden room was not just a physical space, it was a nexus of manipulation, control, and deception. Daniel had underestimated my ability to observe, understand, and anticipate. The room, its contents, and the whispers surrounding it were as much a part of my education as they were part of his plan. Over the following days, I continued to map the room's influence. Staff movements, whispered instructions, and the timing of access became predictable. Every night, the window of opportunity for observation grew clearer. I began cataloging patterns in my mind: who entered first, who lingered, what objects were moved, and the subtle shifts in conversation tone. Each detail brought me closer to understanding the scope of Daniel's secret. By the 9th week, I had developed a comprehensive mental map of the hidden room and its operations. I could anticipate movements, predict conversations, and even foresee minor changes in routine. Every piece of information added to the larger tapestry of awareness I was constructing, a tapestry Daniel believed he could control, yet which I now commanded in silence. And through it all, I realized something profound. The room, the secrecy, the staff, and even Daniel's meticulous planning were irrelevant if I remained vigilant, patient, and observant. Knowledge, observation, and endurance had become my greatest weapons. As the night deepened, I lay awake, absorbing the ambient sounds of the hidden room, tracing the whispers, and cataloging every movement. The silent witness role I had adopted was no longer passive, it was active, strategic, and necessary. I understood that the hidden room held the power to control not just my environment, but the very narrative of my life. And I intended to witness, remember, and ultimately leverage that knowledge when the time was right. Daniel believed the doors, the locks, and the routines gave him control. But I knew differently. True power lay not in confinement or routine, but in observation, patience, and the ability to see what others could not. And so, I continued to lie awake, listening, cataloging, and waiting. The hidden room had revealed its presence, its importance, and its influence. It had also revealed my role, the silent witness who saw everything, heard everything, and would never be deceived. And the time would come when the knowledge I had gathered in silence would shift the balance of power completely. The hidden room had already revealed its weight, its significance, and the network of control Daniel had built around me. But it was the night of the secret meeting that the full depth of his orchestration became terrifyingly clear. I had long suspected that key staff members convened behind closed doors, away from residents' eyes, to coordinate schedules, movements, and secrets. That night, I overheard a gathering I was never meant to witness, an assembly of whispers that revealed motives darker than I had imagined. It began as usual. I lay in my narrow bed, pretending to sleep, ears pressed to the thin wall that separated my room from the hallway. The hum of the heating system and the faint ticking of the clock were constant, familiar companions, yet I had learned to hear beyond them. Footsteps approached, not one, not two, but several, moving with coordinated purpose. There was a pause, then the familiar soft click of a key in a lock, a key that I had catalogued countless times before, yet tonight it carried a weight I could sense even from my room. "They're all here," whispered a familiar voice, Maggie's. "I hope she doesn't suspect anything," Daniel said, his tone low, measured, but laced with tension. "If she realizes, everything falls apart. She notices patterns," Maggie replied. "She's patient, but she's calculating. One misstep and we risk exposure." I held my breath. The words were like fire in my mind. They confirmed what I had suspected. This meeting was about more than routine scheduling or resident care. It was about control, secrecy, and the concealment of a truth Daniel feared I might uncover. I listened as other staff joined the conversation. Voices I recognized from hallways and rounds now formed a chorus of coordination. Every word was carefully chosen, every sentence deliberate. They discussed rotations, access to the hidden room, and measures to ensure I remained unaware of the full scope of Daniel's orchestration. By piecing together fragments of their dialogue, I began to reconstruct the agenda. Daniel was not merely managing a nursing home, he was managing a narrative, one in which I was supposed to remain passive, obedient, and ignorant. Every detail had been anticipated, my routines, my observations, even my mental acuity. Yet, in this room, I realized the cracks in his control. Maggie's hesitations, the subtle cues of uncertainty from other aides, all hinted that this carefully constructed plan was vulnerable. The medications must be accounted for precisely, Daniel said. No deviation, no errors. She cannot see the full picture until the final stage. I noted his words carefully. Final stage. Whatever that meant, it suggested a deeper plan, one that had been in motion long before I arrived at the residence. It was deliberate, meticulous, and chilling. Maggie interjected cautiously, I've observed her closely. She notices inconsistencies, no matter how small. Even subtle deviations could alert her. We need to double-check everything. Daniel sighed, frustration barely masked. Then we tighten every procedure, every schedule, every corridor. Lock every door, monitor every resident interaction. She must not anticipate anything. I closed my eyes, absorbing the gravity of the meeting. The secret gathering had revealed far more than I expected. Daniel's control extended through fear, meticulous scheduling, and obedience, but it relied on the assumption that I would remain unaware, compliant, and passive. He had underestimated my patience, my observation skills, and my ability to decode human behavior. As the meeting progressed, I noticed a subtle tension between Maggie and Daniel. Though she was aware of my awareness, she had to maintain her loyalty, her professional obligation, and perhaps a personal fear of Daniel's wrath. Yet her words, tone, and subtle hesitations betrayed an inner conflict, a silent acknowledgement that I was far more capable than they all assumed. One aide, younger and less experienced, whispered nervously, what if she notices too much? What if she anticipates us? Maggie's response was measured, deliberate. Then we adapt. Observation is key, but underestimating her is the real risk. Stay vigilant. Follow instructions. Nothing leaves this room without coordination. Daniel's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. She must remain unaware. She cannot be allowed to see the strategy unfold. If she does, all control is lost. The words chilled me. I realized that this meeting was not just about schedules or resident care, it was about a calculated orchestration to manipulate me, limit my autonomy, and conceal truths I was never meant to know. Every step, every whispered instruction, every locked door was a piece of a larger, more insidious plan. I lay in bed, pretending sleep, yet my mind raced. Each detail of the meeting became a thread I traced meticulously. The timing of entrances and exits, the subtle signals exchanged, the choice of words, the pauses, the tone, all were data points. I was mapping their plan, learning their patterns, and preparing for the moment when knowledge would become my greatest weapon. By the time the meeting concluded, I had pieced together the key elements. Daniel's plan was multi-layered, precise routines to control movement, selective information access to manipulate perception, and secret coordination among staff to maintain the illusion of care and order. Yet in their very attempt to control, they had revealed themselves, their weaknesses, and the threads I could exploit. The secret meeting behind closed doors had unveiled the stakes. It had revealed the lengths Daniel would go to maintain dominance, the complicity of those around him, and the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. And most importantly, it had confirmed that I, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, was far more aware than they ever anticipated. I realized that patience was my greatest weapon. I could not confront Daniel or the staff yet. Any overt action would expose me prematurely. Instead, I would continue to listen, observe, and gather information. Every conversation, every hesitation, every whisper was a clue. And with each night, my understanding of the hidden dynamics grew sharper, my ability to anticipate stronger, and my strategy clearer. The meeting had also shown me the hierarchy of control, Daniel at the top, Maggie as his cautious confidant, and the aides executing orders with varying degrees of awareness. Yet even within this hierarchy, unpredictability existed. Maggie's awareness, subtle but persistent, suggested that even those under Daniel's direction had their own limits, fears, and moments of hesitation. By the following nights, I focused on tracking the flow of information from the secret meeting. I noted who passed instructions, how they were executed, and which elements were rigid versus flexible. Every pattern became predictable, every repetition reinforced my understanding, and every deviation was a signal. I also began to anticipate Daniel's moves. By analyzing his tone, words, and the hierarchy he maintained, I could foresee actions before they occurred. I could predict which doors would be locked, which residents monitored, and which staff would carry out specific instructions. My awareness became both shield and compass, guiding me through a labyrinth designed to conceal truth. And so, night after night, I continued to lie awake, cataloging every detail. Every whispered word, every creak of the floorboards, every subtle shift in tone was a lesson. The secret meeting had revealed strategy, intent, and vulnerability. I had absorbed it all. I understood that survival required more than endurance. It required awareness, patience, and the ability to anticipate. Daniel's plan was intricate, his control extensive, and his secrecy formidable, but he had overlooked one critical element: me. I was listening, I was observing, I was learning, and when the time came, I would act. The secret meeting behind closed doors had illuminated the stakes. It had revealed the players, the plan, and the vulnerabilities. And I, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, had become the silent witness, cataloging every whisper, every hesitation, every detail that Daniel assumed I would never uncover. The game had shifted. The balance of power was no longer solely in his hands. Knowledge, observation, and patience were my allies. And the next move, whenever it came, would belong to the one who had listened, observed, and waited the longest. By the 9th week at Whitmore Care Residence, I had spent countless nights listening, observing, and mapping every movement, whisper, and action within the building. Each night brought fragments of truth, glimpses of Daniel's hidden agenda, and the subtle cues of those who executed his plan. But nothing could have prepared me for the confrontation that came without warning, one that I never expected, yet had subconsciously anticipated. It began as a typical evening. The halls were dimly lit, the hum of the heating system soft but constant. Staff moved with the precision I had catalogued over weeks, doors clicked into place, and the residents had settled into their nightly routines. I lay in bed, pretending sleep, ears attuned to the faintest sound. But tonight, the rhythm was different. There was tension in the air, a sharpness in the silence that made my skin prickle. I heard the soft creak of my bedroom door opening. Not the usual staff entry for checks or medications, but a deliberate, quiet approach. I held my breath, heart pounding, senses heightened. And then I heard his voice. Daniel's voice, closer than ever before, calm but laced with an intensity I had never experienced. "Mother," he said softly, almost tentatively, "we need to talk." I remained motionless, eyes closed, mind racing. He had entered my room, something he never did. He had always relied on staff and routines to control me, to maintain the illusion of care while executing his plan. Now, he had bypassed everything, seeking direct confrontation. I opened my eyes slowly, pretending grogginess, the facade of sleep intact. "Daniel," I whispered, voice barely audible. "Yes," he replied, stepping closer. The dim light cast shadows across his face, highlighting tension lines that betrayed worry, frustration, and something else I could not immediately name. "I need to explain. I need you to understand." I studied him carefully. Every movement, every tone, every hesitation was data. He believed control came from proximity and authority, yet he had underestimated the observer I had become. I was not only listening, I was analyzing, calculating, preparing. "Explain what?" I asked softly, maintaining an air of vulnerability. "The situation," he said, glancing around nervously. "The residents, my decisions, everything. I only wanted what was best. For you." I let a faint smile touch my lips. His words were carefully chosen, but I had catalogued every action, every lock, every whisper that contradicted them. "Best?" I asked, tone light, probing. "You hid me here. You orchestrated routines, locked doors, controlled every movement, all for my best." That's quite a plan for care. He hesitated, swallowing hard. His carefully constructed facade was cracking. I had to ensure your safety. You weren't well. You needed protection, structure, oversight. I couldn't risk anything. I sat up slightly, eyes narrowing, mind analyzing each word. Protection, I repeated softly. And yet, you underestimated me. You believed that I would not notice patterns, routines, whispers. You believed that your meticulous plan could obscure the truth from a woman who spent a lifetime observing human behavior. Daniel flinched. I didn't anticipate your acuity. I thought compliance would be enough. That routine, order, and oversight would suffice. But you noticed everything. You've been listening all along. I leaned closer, voice calm but firm. All along, Daniel. Every whisper, every plan, every secret movement. I cataloged them. I mapped them. I understood the hierarchy, the schedules, and the manipulations. And now, here you are, speaking directly to me, as if proximity could compensate for what you believed was ignorance. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and fear. Evident. Mother, I only wanted to keep you safe. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted softly. I understand your fear, your desire to control, your need to orchestrate every aspect of my life. But I also understand the truth. Control is an illusion, secrecy is fragile, and observation is power. You built an empire of routines, but you forgot one essential fact. You were dealing with Eleanor Grace Whitmore, not a passive resident. He looked at me, eyes wide, as if realizing for the first time that his meticulous control had failed. His hands trembled slightly, the authority he had wielded for weeks evaporating under the weight of my awareness. He began, faltering, I didn't want it to be like this. I only wanted to control me. I finished, voice steady, unwavering. To hide your plan, to manipulate every step, every whisper, every interaction. Yes, Daniel, I understand. But it no longer matters. Knowledge and patience are my weapons now. Observation has been my shield, and endurance my strategy. And you underestimated me. He sank into the chair at the edge of the bed, head in hands, silent for a long, tense moment. The weight of realization pressed down on him. For the first time, the meticulous architect of my confinement faced the reality that his carefully constructed plan had been seen, heard, and catalogued in ways he could not control. You heard everything, he said finally, voice barely audible. The meetings, the routines, the staff, you know it all. I nodded slowly. I heard everything. I observed everything. I know the schedules, the hidden room, the whispered plans behind closed doors. I understand the hierarchy, the dependencies, and the vulnerabilities. And I am patient. I will act when the time is right. His face paled. You've been waiting, watching, all this time. Yes, I replied calmly. I have been silent, a witness to every detail. But now you know. The balance of power is no longer solely in your hands. You built a fortress of secrecy, yet you failed to account for one thing, my awareness. Daniel sat back, breathing shallow, the tension between us palpable. I thought I was protecting you. I never intended. Intended or not, Daniel, I said, voice firm, eyes unwavering, control is an illusion. Observation cannot be hidden from those who listen. And patience cannot be rushed. You have orchestrated routines, hidden rooms, whispered meetings, all to maintain an illusion. But illusions crumble under scrutiny. And I have been scrutinizing, quietly, relentlessly, for weeks. He remained silent, unable to speak, the weight of his realization pressing upon him. His control, meticulously planned, lay exposed. Every movement, every whispered instruction, every lock and key, seen, catalogued, understood. I leaned back slightly, maintaining composure. Tonight, you have confronted the consequence of underestimating me. Your secrecy, your control, your plan, revealed not by recklessness or accident, but by the patient observation of a woman you assumed would comply. And now, Daniel, you must accept that the narrative you tried to control is no longer yours to dictate. The room fell silent except for the hum of the heating system. The confrontation had ended, not with aggression, but with understanding, realization, and the unspoken shift of power. I lay back in bed once more, pretending calm, while internally, I catalogued every expression, every hesitation, every shift in his tone. The confrontation had confirmed my observations, validated my strategy, and revealed the cracks in Daniel's control. And as the night deepened, I realized that the final stage of this intricate, orchestrated plan was approaching, not through confrontation or force, but through patience, observation, and the quiet accumulation of knowledge. Daniel had believed control was achieved through proximity, secrecy, and obedience. But I had learned that true power lay in awareness, patience, and understanding the patterns that others take for granted. Tonight, the confrontation had confirmed it. I was no longer the passive resident. I was the observer, the silent witness, and the strategist. And when the time came, I would use every detail I had gathered to shift the balance completely. The 9th week had ended with a confrontation I never expected. Daniel had entered my room, attempting to assert control and justify his actions, only to be met with the calm, unwavering awareness I had cultivated over months of observation. That night, I realized the game had shifted. The balance of power, once his alone, had been subtly but irrevocably altered. But it was in the 10th week that the truth finally revealed itself, a truth I had been piecing together silently, patiently, and with relentless focus. It began as a quiet night. The corridors of Whitmore Care residence were dimly lit, the usual hum of the heating system a familiar companion. I lay in bed, pretending sleep, but my mind was alert, attentive to every footstep, every whisper, every shift in the patterns I had come to know intimately. Weeks of listening and observing had taught me that the night held answers Daniel believed he could conceal. I heard the familiar soft click of keys. Maggie entered first, followed closely by a few aides. But tonight, their movements carried a new tension, a sense of urgency. I listened carefully, piecing together fragments of conversation that carried more weight than ever before. Everything has been accounted for. Daniel's voice was steady, but I detected an undercurrent of anxiety. Yes, Maggie replied softly, almost reverently. She has noticed inconsistencies before, but tonight, she seems aware in ways we cannot predict. Daniel exhaled sharply. Then we proceed with caution. The information in the hidden room, it must remain secure until the final moment. No deviations. Nothing left to chance. I allowed myself a faint smile. Final moment. That phrase resonated. For weeks, I had been cataloging every movement, every conversation, every secret plan. The hidden room, the secret meetings, the whispered instructions, all pieces of a puzzle I now understood fully. I rose quietly, careful not to make a sound, and positioned myself near the door that led to the corridor adjacent to the hidden room. Tonight, I would witness, in full clarity, the culmination of Daniel's orchestration. Every step, every whisper, every subtle signal would be observed, remembered, and understood. The aides entered the hidden room first, carefully transporting files, charts, and what I deduced to be recordings. Maggie followed, her presence commanding yet tense. Daniel remained near the threshold, overseeing the operation with a precision born of obsession. As I listened, the truth began to crystallize. The hidden room contained records not just of my routines or daily habits, but of every resident, every staff member, and, most critically, every moment of manipulation and control Daniel had orchestrated. This was the core of his empire, information, meticulously gathered and guarded, intended to maintain dominance and secrecy. Maggie's voice pierced the quiet. Mother, she's more aware than you realize. Everything you've done, every plan, every secret, she has observed it all. Daniel's hands tightened into fists. I underestimated her, he admitted quietly. I believed control could be achieved through routine, secrecy, and obedience. But he paused, voice dropping almost to a whisper, she sees everything. I felt a surge of satisfaction, tempered by caution. My awareness was not yet action, it was preparation. Observation had been my shield, patience my weapon, and now the moment of revelation approached. Maggie carefully handed Daniel a file, his expression unreadable as he examined its contents. This is everything, she said softly. The final piece. I recognized the significance instantly. This file contained the culmination of his plan, the detailed schedule, the hidden room's contents, staff rotations, and the ultimate objective he had sought to conceal. Every step, every secret, every manipulation was documented. And now, for the first time, the narrative could be understood in its entirety. I crept closer, careful to remain unseen, and listened as Daniel's voice, tinged with tension, explained the plan to Maggie and the aides. She must remain unaware until the final stage, he said. This information gives us control, but she cannot know. Any hint of awareness will jeopardize everything. I allowed myself a quiet, controlled laugh, a sound that carried no fear, only the confidence of one who had anticipated every move. For weeks, I had observed, listened, and understood. I had mapped every routine, every conversation, and every hidden motive. And now, the final revelation unfolded before me, in all its intricate, calculated detail. The truth was clear: Daniel had hidden me not merely to protect, but to control. Every action, every lock, every schedule, every whispered instruction was designed to shape perception, limit autonomy, and maintain secrecy. He had believed that by isolating me, orchestrating staff movements, and securing the hidden room, he could dictate the narrative. But he had underestimated the patient observer, me. Maggie's tone shifted, almost imperceptibly. She notices everything, Daniel. Every pattern, every deviation, every subtle signal. You underestimated her. Daniel's hands trembled slightly. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought structure, routine, secrecy, could keep her safe. But she, his voice faltered, she is more than I anticipated. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of understanding sink in. The room, the documents, the files, the meticulous plans, they were all irrelevant if awareness was present. And I had been aware, patiently, silently, and strategically. Finally, I stepped into the corridor, revealing myself. Daniel and the aides turned sharply, surprise and tension flashing across their faces. Maggie's eyes widened, a mixture of caution and recognition. I've been listening, I said calmly, voice steady. I've observed, catalogued, and understood everything. The routines, the hidden room, the whispered meetings, every detail. Daniel's face drained of color. You've known. I nodded. I've known. Every step of your plan has been observed. Every whisper, every hesitation, every lock and key has been noted. And now, the truth is revealed. Maggie remained silent, tension etched into her features. The aides shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's control, meticulously planned over weeks, had collapsed under the weight of my awareness. I stepped closer, voice firm but composed. You built an empire of control, secrecy, and routine. You believed obedience and manipulation would suffice. But control is an illusion, Daniel. Knowledge is power, observation is defense, and patience is the ultimate weapon. Daniel's gaze faltered, the realization complete. I didn't anticipate your awareness. Now you see, I replied softly. The truth has always been here. I am not merely a passive resident. I am Eleanor Grace Whitmore. Observer, strategist, silent witness, and the narrative you attempted to control is no longer yours to dictate. The tension in the room was palpable. The final revelation had shifted everything. The hidden room, the secret meetings, the orchestrated schedules, they had all been exposed, observed, and understood. And Daniel, the architect of control, faced the undeniable fact that his meticulous plan had been seen through by the one person he underestimated most. I allowed a moment of silence to settle, absorbing the gravity of the revelation. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Observation, patience, and understanding had triumphed over secrecy, manipulation, and control. And as I stepped fully into the light of awareness, I realized that the story, the narrative of confinement, control, and hidden motives, was finally mine to understand, and, when the time came, to direct. The truth had been revealed. And in that revelation lay not fear, but clarity, empowerment, and the certainty that observation and patience would guide the next chapter of my life.